Let's turn our Bibles to Acts 27. Acts 27, we're going to read up to 28 and verse 16. Acts 27, I am reading from the English Standard Version. And when it was decided that we should sail for Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. And embarking in a ship of Adramyttium, which was about to sail to the ports along the coast of Asia, we put to sea accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica. The next day we put in at Sidon. And Julius treated Paul kindly and gave him leave to go to his friends and be cared for. And putting out to sea, from there we sailed under the lee of Cyprus, because the winds were against us. And when we had sailed across the open sea along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra in Lycia. There the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing for Italy and put us on board. We sailed slowly for a number of days and arrived with difficulty off Cnidus. And the wind did not allow us to go any further. We sailed under the lee of Crete of Salmone, coasting along it with difficulty. We came to a place called Fair Havens, near which was the city of Lycia. Since much time had passed and the voyage was now dangerous, because even the fast was already over, Paul advised them, saying, Sirs, I perceive that the voyage will be with injury and much loss, not only to the cargo and ship, but also of our lives. But the centurion paid more attention to the pilot and the owner of the ship than to what Paul said. And because the harbor was not suitable to spend the winter in, the majority decided to put out to sea from there, on the chance that somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, facing both southwest and northwest, and spend the winter there. Now, when the south wind blew gently, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, they weighed anchor and sailed along Crete close to the shore. But soon, a tempestuous wind called the northeaster struck down from the land. And when the ship was caught and could not face the wind, we gave way to it and were driven along. Running under the lee of a small island called Cauda, we managed with difficulty to secure the ship's boat. After hoisting it up, they used supports to undergird the ship. Then, fearing that they would run aground off Syrtis, they lowered the gear. And thus, they were driven along. Since we were violently storm-tossed, they began the next day to jettison the cargo. And on the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest lay upon us, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. Since they had been without food for a long time, Paul stood up among them and said, Men, you should have listened to me and not have sailed from Crete and incurred this injury and loss. Yet now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only the ship. For this very night there stood before me an angel of God to whom I belong and whom I worship. And he said, Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have been told. But we must run aground on some island. When the 14th night had come, as we were being driven across the Adriatic Sea, about midnight, the sailors suspected that they were nearing land. So they took a sounding and found 20 fathoms. A little farther on, they took a sounding again and found 15 fathoms. And fearing that they might run on the rocks, they let down 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. And as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship and had lowered the ship's boat into the sea under the pretense of laying out anchors from the bow, Paul said to the centurion and soldiers, "Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved." Then the soldiers cut away the ropes of the ship and let it go. As day was about to dawn, Paul urged them all to take some food, saying, "Today is the 14th day that you have continued in suspense and without food, having taken nothing. Therefore, I urge you to take some food, for it will give you strength. For not a hair is to perish from the head of any of you." And when he had said these things, he took bread, and giving thanks to God in the presence of all, he broke it and began to eat. Then they were all encouraged and ate some food themselves. We were all 276 persons in the ship. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship, throwing out the wheat into the sea. Now when it was day, they did not recognize the land, but they noticed a bay with a beach on which they planned, if possible, to run the ship ashore. So they cast off the anchors and left them in the sea, at the same time loosening the ropes that tied the rudders. Then hoisting the foresail to the wind, they made for the beach. But striking a reef, they ran the vessel aground. The bow stuck and remained immovable, and the stern was being broken up by the surf. The soldiers' plan was to kill the soldiers, lest any should swim away and escape. But the centurion, wishing to save Paul, kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and to make for land, and the rest on planks or pieces of the ship. And so it was that all were brought safely to land. After we were brought safely through, we then learned that the island was called Malta. The native people showed us unusual kindness, for they kindled a fire and welcomed us all, because it had begun to rain and was cold. When Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks and put them on the fire, a viper came out because of the heat and fastened on his hand. When the native people saw the creature hanging from his hand, they said to one another, "No doubt this man is a murderer. Though he escaped the sea, justice has not allowed him to live." He, however, shook off the creature into the fire and suffered no harm. They were waiting for him to swell up or suddenly fall down dead. But when they waited a long time, and saw no misfortune come to him, they changed their minds, and they said that he was a god. Now, in the neighborhood of that place were lands belonging to the chief man of the island, named Publius, who received us and entertained us hospitably for 3 days. It happened that the father of Publius lay sick with fever and dysentery. And Paul visited him and prayed, and putting his hands on him, healed him. And when this had taken place, the rest of the people of the island who had diseases also came and were cured. They also honored us greatly. And when we were about to sail, they put on board whatever we needed. After 3 months, we set sail in a ship that had wintered in the island, a ship of Alexandria, with the twin gods as a figurehead. Putting in at Syracuse, we stayed there for 3 days. And from there, we made a circuit and arrived at Rhegium. And after 1 day, a south wind sprang up, and on the 2nd day, we came to Puteoli. There we found brothers who were invited to stay with them for 7 days. And so we came to Rome. And the brothers there, when they heard about us, came as far as the Forum of Appius and the 3 taverns to meet us. On seeing them, Paul thanked God and took courage. And when we came into Rome, Paul was allowed to stay by himself with a soldier who guarded him. This is the word of the Lord. The story is drawing to a close. We today will, if the Lord tarries and keeps me alive until I finish this sermon, will be entering into the very last chapter of the book of Acts. We last week saw the 4 trials that wrapped up his time in Cenchrea and allowed us to enter into this spot where Paul gets on a ship and begins his journey to Rome. The narrative ahead of us is filled with images. and very clear descriptions. If you are paying attention, you might feel like we need to pause on this particular sermon and do a little study on maritime or on ships and different parts of ships and what it looks like to actually sail. It's given from a very eyewitness perspective. This is Luke himself. He says we multiple times. In the entire story, you don't always hear Paul, not the Dr. Luke say we. But in a portion like this we're looking at, he's actually together with Paul on this particular ship, giving to us eyewitness accounts of what happened. I think the best way for us to go through this narrative is exactly the way it is laid out. What we are hopefully going to see in this particular portion, or what I am seeking to convince you of through this particular narrative, is to take courage even though all earthly cause for hope is extinguished. Still take courage. Take courage even though all earthly cause for hope is extinguished. For the God who has called you to go in his name is at work in you and for you, and he will bring you safely home. There's cause to hope. There's cause to hope. Take courage. Observe how the narrative begins. We are told, first of all, that it was decided. And when it was decided that we should sail for Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. It's an interesting beginning to the story if we know how the story has been flowing thus far. Go back to chapter 23 and verse 11. I know you're in chapter 27, right? But go all the way back to chapter 23 and see where it was truly decided that they would sail to Rome. Acts 23 verse 11. The following night the Lord stood by him and said, "Take courage. Take courage. For as you have testified to the facts about me in Jerusalem, so you must testify also in Rome." In 23:11, it was decided that Paul would go to Rome. It was a long journey still, a very dangerous journey. In fact, it says that happened at night when the Lord stood beside him and told him that he would testify about the facts concerning him in Rome. And the very morning, 40 people took an oath to kill him. So it wasn't an easy journey. But by the time you're getting to 27 and verse 1, we are seeing the providential work of God that has preserved Paul through many toils and snares, and has been working out through those legal systems his own purposes. And so the human agents now in 27:1 are referred to as deciding that Paul would go to Rome. This obviously is a decision that was reached on the basis of Paul having appealed to Caesar as the trials were going on, and Herod has declared just before we enter 27 that if this man had not appealed to Caesar, he would have been set free. But to Caesar he appealed, and to Caesar he shall go. We are also told that he has been entrusted to a man named Julius. It's interesting as far as Julius goes, verse 3, that we are told that Julius treated Paul kindly and gave him leave to go to his friends. This detail, as we are being given the lay of the narrative, is also important. The decision is important. We know that there's a God behind it because of the things that happened all the way back in chapter 23. That same God who purposed to send Paul to Italy, to Rome, is also a God who has given to him certain circumstances as he heads out. He has a companion called called Luke, and a friend called Aristarchus, and there's a centurion called Julius who likes him. Luke finds this important for us to know. And so they set out. The next day, we put out Sidon, and verse 4, and putting out to sea, from there we sailed under the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against us. So the lee, it's leeward, the wind that is blowing towards the land as opposed to windward. So in many ways, whenever it says lee, we'll say that a couple of other times, the boat is sailing between the wind and the land. It can be a precarious way of sailing because the wind can cause you to be crushed into the rocks of whatever island you are sailing in between. That makes that particular journey a difficult one. And so they go. They sail under the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against them. And when we had sailed across the open sea along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra in Lycia. And there they get onto another boat, a ship of Alexandria that is sailing for Italy. As this journey is continuing, we are being told multiple times that it starts off difficult. It's not an easy journey. We sailed slowly, verse 7, for a number of days and arrived with difficulty at Cnidus. And as the wind did not allow us to go farther, we sailed under the lee of Crete of Salmone, coasting along it with difficulty. You've had difficulty multiple times. You should know what's coming. This is a hard journey. I want you to keep in mind. Chapter 23 and verse 11. What happened all the way back then? God stood by Paul and said what? As you testified about me in Jerusalem, so you will testify about me in Rome. Oh, well, they set out. It's been decided. But at the very get-go of that journey, it is a difficult journey. Coasting along it with difficulty, they came to a place called Fair Havens, near which was the city of Lycia. Now, verse 9 tells us, since much of the time had passed and the voyage was now dangerous because even the fast was already over, Paul advised them, saying, Sirs, I perceive that the voyage will be with injury and much loss. What kind of loss? Not only of the cargo and the ship, but also of our lives. This journey is beginning, we're being told that the journey has started off difficult. Now it is being described as dangerous. And then Paul, in assessing what lies ahead of them, declares it might get deadly. It's not looking good so far. The time is dangerous. Paul, we're not told specifically that he saw a vision or he's making a prophecy about the future. In fact, the word that is being used here is that he advised on the basis of a well-known fact. What's this well-known fact? That the fast was over. This is a reference to the Day of Atonement. The way they discern the Day of Atonement is by looking at the position of the moon. And then they identify the date. The Day of Atonement this year will be October 4th. So it's right around this particular season that we're in. End of September, early October. And typically, that particular season was a season when sailing would come to an end. Sailing would start getting dangerous, and after that season, they would cease sailing entirely until the very next year in February. So this is the tail end of any seafaring activities, because things are getting very dangerous. And this is a well-known fact. So Paul, knowing that this is the season that we're in, 1. 2, coming up until this point, it's already proven to be so difficult. It's taken so much time to get here. Paul pauses and talks to the leadership and says, guys, this is not looking good. Let's not go any farther. Because what I'm perceiving is that there will be loss, not only of the ship and the cargo, but also of lives. This is where the problems really begin. Because we're told that they basically ignored Paul. Verse 11, but the centurion paid more attention to the pilot and the owner of the ship than to what Paul said. And because the harbor was not suitable to spend the winter in, small concern, the majority decided to put out to sea from there on the chance that somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, facing both southwest and northwest. So from where they are, Fair Havens, to where they're trying to get to Phoenix, it's actually a short hop. It's about 6 miles, a bit more than 10 kilometers if you convert that. That's not long. That's a nice morning jog, isn't it? For some of you. And so they look and they say, well, it's not a really good place for us to stay. Make all winter here, be trapped here. That's a better port to spend winter. Let's just make a quick hop. You should look at this on the map. Please do that. You're going to really enjoy this particular portion a whole lot more. It's like this. We'll come from here and hop over there, and then we'll wait there. Verse 13. Now, when the south wind blew gently, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, they weighed anchor. Weighing anchor is raising anchor. It sounds quite the opposite. So basically they lifted anchor and they set sail along Crete, close to the shore. But soon a tempestuous wind called the northeaster struck down from the land, and the ship was caught and could not face the wind. We gave way to it and were driven along. So where if Paul is trying, they're trying to hop with the ship from this particular location over here, and they say, oh, the wind looks nice, let's head out now. Things look calm, we can hack this. Again, it's a super short distance. The minute they get out, a wind strikes from land and it pushes them way off course, deep into the sea. Wind was too strong. It's called a northeaster. This is a cyclone that comes down upon them. A cyclone could have winds that could get to hurricane speeds. So we don't know exactly what these winds are, but a cyclone could have winds that are well over 100 kilometers an hour, that have struck them, taken control of the ship, and pushed them out. Verse 16, running under the lee of a small island called Cauda, we managed with difficulty to secure the ship's boat. After hoisting it up, they used supports to undergird the ship. Then, fearing that they would run aground on the side race, they lowered the gear. And thus they were driven along. These are people, these are little sheep, a wooden ship. Think about yourselves. 276 people in a ship, caught in a cyclone, in the worst time possible. And they are doing absolutely everything that they can to maintain control of the ship, but they have been unable to stay their course. They've been blown into the deep sea. And there they're doing everything that they can. They take ropes, that's what it's called, to put supports, and they run them around the ship so that the ship does not get broken apart by the winds and the waves. And they're tying that ship together so that it can hold. And then they lower the mast so that it doesn't break under the wind. And there they are, lost at sea. They have lost any hope of navigation. That's why the sail is down. They already lost their course. And now they have been caught in the tempest called the northeaster in the middle of the ocean. Listen to the words being used, verse 18. Since we were violently storm-tossed, they began the next day to jettison cargo. Strip is awash. This is survival mode now. So let's make the ship lighter to allow it to respond to the waves that are shifting side by side. A lighter boat can survive that a whole lot better than a steady ship that has weight, which means that it's impacting the wave. Likelihood of breaking is a whole lot more. So if it's lighter, it can go hopefully a bit more with the wave. So they're emptying the cargo, they're tossing stuff overboard because of just how violent the storm was. In verse 19, and on the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard. The ship's tackle is the gear that they would use, the rigging gear that they would use, the machine that they would use to load cargo and to offload cargo. So think of their little ancient cranes. It's heavy. And yet they came together and with their own hands, they heaved it and they tossed even that off the ship. They are doing absolutely everything that they can to stay alive. Everything in the sailor's handbook for surviving a cyclone has been used, but to no avail. So it says in verse 20, and when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. So Luke is helping us to understand just how dire the situation was. They have been out at sea for multiple days. They have done everything that they can. Tempest is upon the ship. There's no stars above, which is the ancient navigation system, because there's thick clouds over them. And this is not just the unbelievers in the boat who lost hope. Aristarchus is with them. Luke is with them. Luke is speaking as one who is inside of that hopelessness. And they had tried all that they could to hold on to hope, but finally they let it go. They have resigned themselves to the situation. It's interesting, before we move further, to note a couple of things here. Note one, that it's a natural calamity. It's a natural calamity. In many cases, I would almost argue it is easier to keep focus when you know I am being persecuted for the sake of Christ, because I was preaching Christ and then they started stoning me. This is not one of those. In fact, they've been caught both by bad weather and by silly decisions. If this could ever feel pointless, if anything could ever feel pointless, this does. It's a natural calamity. The wicked and the righteous are suffering it together. It's the result of a reckless decision by the centurion and the owner of the ship. These people are exhausted where they are. They have exhausted everything. They've exhausted all of their wisdom. Maybe they've tried all of that. All of their wisdom exhausted. All of their skills exhausted. All of their strength exhausted. All of their inner resolve to keep fighting and keep trying exhausted. They have been emptied of all of it. They are not even waiting for deliverance. Forget about throwing this out and throwing that out. Any hope that even a help could come from outside, gone. They've been emptied of every single hope. Nothing and no one has come through. I imagine for some in the boat it's even heavier, because they know that they are in this particular pickle because they chose to be. Because they wanted a better place to spend winter, as opposed to staying where they were. That's the darkness that Luke has helped us understand where they were. Let's keep reading. Verse 27. Verse 21, sorry. And since they had been without food for a long time, Paul stood up among them and said, "Men, you should have listened to me and not have sailed from Crete and incurred this injury and loss." Verse 22. "Yet now I urge you to take heart. For there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night there stood before me an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I worship. And he said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God, that it will be exactly as I have been told. But we must run aground on some island.'" This is how the story is going. It's been dark. It's been difficult, then dangerous, then near deadly. The people have exhausted all of their resources. They have done absolutely everything that they can. They have sunk so deep that they are at a point of total despair. And in that dark, bleak hole, Paul says to them, "Take heart. Take heart." Maybe I ask you, why would you take heart in a situation such as that? None of us have ever been caught at sea in a storm like this. You can watch a movie or two, to get a little sense of it, isn't it? And I've watched a movie or two. And if it's anything like that, it's unthinkable, isn't it? Why would you take heart? Lost at sea, out of any resources whatsoever, having lost hope, still in the darkness. Why would you take heart? Is Paul dropping them some Christianese? Some cliches? You know? Something he read on a mug. Keep your head up. Why would you say take heart? Paul says take heart because God has spoken. Take heart because God has said how this story ends. Take heart because of that. Take heart because this story will end exactly as God has said it will end. Take heart, O sailors, because you are not in the hands of the storm. You are in the hands of the God behind the storm. Take heart. The God to whom I belong. I just love that little phrase. Paul knows he's not alone. He's wandering out there in the ocean. He belongs to someone. And that someone to whom he belongs has spoken. And so this little phrase, the common one, is what Paul has. Look at verse 25. So take heart. Why? Why take heart? For I have what? I have faith in God. Would I suggest that it would be an act of utter stupidity to take heart for any other reason in a storm like this? But Paul doesn't say to them, take heart, for I can see the winds changing. That's the logic of the chaps who are on the ocean saying we can hop over to Phoenix. You remember them? Can we make it? They asked, can we do this? And then it says in verse 13, now when the south wind blew gently, that's their basis. Let's go. We'll make it. The circumstances look favorable. That's not why Paul is taking heart. The circumstances are not looking favorable for Paul. In fact, by the time this little section is done, they're between 3 days out at sea. They'll be out at sea for 14 days. 14 days. Listen, if you lost hope on day 3, how are we doing the next 11? It's not because he's seen something and this might be a timely time to say, oh, you see, God is at work. You see, that wind is changing. Oh, you see, there's a little hole in the sky. I can see a star. No. Take heart because God has spoken. Not circumstances have changed, but the God to whom I belong and the God that I worship has said, we will make it safely home. And I have faith that it will be exactly. What faith is this? Huh? No stars, staff overboard, ropes around the ship, tempest tossing you to and fro. It will be exactly as he has said. On the basis of that, take heart. This is the exhortation to us, isn't it? If you have forgotten, that's the words that were spoken all the way back in chapter 23 about this voyage. Remember that? 23:11, let me read it for you again. The following night the Lord stood by him. This is after he was being torn to pieces. And what did the Lord say then? Take courage. For as you have testified of the facts about me in Jerusalem, so you must testify also in Rome. Now they're in the middle of the ocean. That was with a mob wanting to eat him alive. Will I really survive? Take courage. You will. Did things get immediately better? No. Next morning, what happened? 40 guys decided we're going to kill you. If you're looking for circumstances to take courage, this is a bad place to be. Because things only got worse after that particular message. But God said it, and so God was going to do it. They're in the ocean. God has spoken. And Paul says, I have faith in God. Saints, have faith in God. Put your faith in God. On this narrow path you have been called to follow Jesus. On this journey to be his servant, to obey his will, to fulfill his commands, to make it home. It might get dark. It might get hard. And some of it might feel as pointless as this storm. But even then, when all earthly hope, cause for hope, has been extinguished, put your faith in God and take heart. This is the call. Well, maybe you're sitting here and saying, but no angel from God has shown up in my bedroom last night. And it's interesting what Paul will say about angels, isn't it? In Galatians, he basically says, if an angel says something different from this word, let him be what? What's more superior? Revelation that comes from an angel or revelation that comes from God's word? In a letter to the Corinthians, he actually tells them that sometimes Satan himself clothes himself as an angel of. That's not the source that is reliable. If Paul had cause to take heart because God has spoken, how much more we? We have actually more Bible than him. And he has spoken. He has spoken his promise to always, now and forever be by your side. And listen, that will be exactly as he has said. That there's no circumstance, no situation where you will be alone. He has promised to work all things, including this. Whatever this is. I can say that with confidence because that falls under the all things. For your eternal good. He has promised to hold you fast. No one can snatch you out of his hand. He has promised that your greatest enemies, sin, death, and the devil, will not conquer you. In Christ you are more than conquerors. He has promised to pray for you when you do not know how to pray for yourself. He has promised that everything you lose in this world for his sake will be repaid 100-fold. He has promised that your light and momentary affliction is working for you an eternal weight of glory. He has promised that he will never allow you to be tempted with anything that is too great for you. With every temptation, he will always provide a way for escape. So you can always be confident. If there's a weight that has come upon you, it is not indiscriminate. You're not in the hands of whatever burden that is. There is a God in heaven who is measuring to the very last gram. And he will not allow a weight even a slight bit more than what you're able to endure. You can be sure of that. He has promised that even if they kill you, not a hair of your head will be hurt. Selah. He has promised that he has prepared a place for you. He has promised that he will hear every one of your prayers. He has promised that he will wipe away your tears. He has promised that he will return for you. Your king is coming. He has promised to clothe you in glory and splendor. This world has nothing to offer you. He has promised that you will spend endless days in his presence. He has promised that he will not deny you on that last day. On account of these promises and more, take courage. None of these things will fail. None of them will fail. Throughout the book of Acts, this God has been on display. The church is not growing out of common sense, if you so please, or just mere logic. There is a God behind this church that is building it. There's a power that is true and real, that is creating a people for himself. And that's who Paul believes in. He saw him risen from the grave. There's an exalted Christ, the resurrected Jesus. They believe in him. He's not a myth. He is the exalted Lord of all. When he rose, what did he say to the disciples? All what? All authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Go. Paul is going to Jerusalem with that reality. He knows that there's a God who has authority over storms. Doesn't matter how much they rage. He's been exalted over Sanhedrin. They stand in front of earthly authorities and they look them to the face because Christ is greater. Sanhedrins are not greater than him. Angry mobs are not greater than him. Tribunes, proconsuls and kings are not greater than him. Hurricanes are not greater than him. Snakes are not greater than him. Bad decisions are not greater than him. This is the King of Kings that he believes in. So have faith in God. So he calls them to take courage. And then the narrative continues. Verse 27. When the 14th night had come, and as we were being driven along the Adriatic Sea, across the Adriatic Sea, about midnight, the sailors suspected that they were nearing land, so they took a sounding and found 20 fathoms. Sounding, they're measuring the depth, fathom, about 6 feet. They're 6 times 20 feet from the bottom. They go a little farther and they find it's reducing. It's now 15 feet. It's 15 fathoms, sorry. So they're getting closer and closer to land. And verse 29, and fearing that we might run into the rocks, they let down the anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. You ever been there? Things have not gotten much better. Have you seen? Circumstances haven't changed drastically. Here's how bad things are. They're praying for what? Asubuhi ifike. It's night. And we're just hoping to make it through the night. This is precarious. Each hour looks like a week when it's a night such as this. So there they are. So some sailors don't really do what Paul said, which was take courage, have faith in God. They resort to their own means. And the sailors, verse 30, were seeking to escape from the ship, and they lowered the ship's boat into the sea under pretense of laying out anchors from the bow. And Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved. And things seem to have changed a little bit now, where Paul talked to them about what was going to happen and they ignored him earlier. Now when Paul speaks, they listen. Verse 32, the soldiers cut away the ropes of the ship and let it go. As the day was about to dawn, Paul urged them to take some food, saying, today is the 14th day that you have continued in suspense and without food, having taken nothing. Therefore, I urge you to take some food, for it will give you strength. For not a hair is to perish from the head of any of you. And when he had said these things, he took bread, and giving thanks to God in the presence of all, he broke it and began to eat. And they were all encouraged and ate some food themselves. They were all 276 persons in the ship. And when they had eaten enough, they lighted the ship, throwing out the wheat into the sea. The narrative shifts a little bit. Remember those deeply depressed, discouraged folk before Paul spoke? It doesn't seem like they shifted much until this particular point. What does Paul do? Look at what Paul does. Paul says, I have faith in God. Nobody has been eating on the ship. What does Paul do? People are in a precarious place. They're desperately praying for day to come. Day comes. But this mob is down and discouraged. In that crowd, Paul stands up, takes food, gives thanks for it, breaks it, and starts eating. Do you see this little crew? 276 people, all have lost all hope. And then a guy is eating in the middle of them. And slowly, one by one, doesn't say one by one, I'm just adding some stuff here. They all join him. Out of Paul's faith, he is so confident that this story is going to end exactly as the Lord has said. He's happy to take a little bite. And he encourages the rest of them as well to join him in that. It will be fine. It will be okay. In a bad place, you haven't eaten for 14 days. Let's pray. Let's give thanks and eat. And then he proceeds to eat. That meal Paul is taking, I know it doesn't sound amazing here. That meal is an utter act of what? Faith. Utter act of faith. Why would you eat if you're going to die any moment? Is that what's on your mind? I'm hungry. I need a bite. Utter act of faith. And his faith is what blesses everybody else around him. A confidence in God and his promises and his purposes. Verse 39. Now when it was day, they did not recognize the land, but they noticed a bay with a beach. And so you see them here starting to undo the things that they had done earlier. They loosened the ropes, verse 40, that they had tied, with which they had tied the rudders. Then hoisting the foresail, remember they had lowered the gear? Hoisting the foresail to the wind, they made for the beach. But striking a reef, they ran the vessel aground. Now the bow, that's the front part of the ship, was stuck and remained immovable. And the stern, the backside of the ship, was being broken up by the surf. So another near-death experience. This might get chaotic, some people might survive, some people might die. And so the soldiers, verse 42, planned to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim away and escape. But verse 43, the centurion, remember the centurion? Luke told us as it began what? He liked Paul. This is in a different way. He treated him favorably. This near-death experience, they're all about to die, but the centurion specifically wishing to save Paul. Not the other bunch of prisoners, but Paul specifically. Wishing to save Paul, kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who would swim to jump overboard first and to make for the land, and the rest on planks or on pieces of the ship. And so it was that all were brought safely to land. How was it that they got here? Think about the providence of God. You remember all the way back in 23 when God purposed that he would go to Rome, and then 40 people took an oath saying what? They'll kill Paul. They'll not eat until they kill Paul. How did God thwart that plan? Using Paul's sister's son. Who even knew Paul had a sister? God was waiting to unleash him just for the right moment. Picture 40 men, most probably angry men. He'll die. We swear. We promise. We won't eat until 40 is a lot. One type of man like that is a problem. 40. How does God thwart them? A nephew. A nephew, that whole plot crumbles. Out at sea, it seems chaotic. Seriously. They were trying to hop on to Phoenix, 6 miles. They're out in the middle of the ocean. That tempest, that storm is the one that leads them specifically to Malta, an island that just so happens not to have cannibals, but to have people who treat them surprisingly well. And then something happens and they're all about to be killed as prisoners. And what stops it? What stops it? That there's a God who likes Paul. Everything is a tool in God's hands. Everything. The winds, little boys, powerful centurions, everything. And if God has purpose to get them to Malta and then Rome, He will get them to Malta and then Rome. Easily. So whereas on the human side, it seems like, it's almost over, then we're back up again. That's not how it looks like to God. God is not catching His heart in His mouth, so to say. It is all working out according to plan, including making a centurion like him. And so they've landed now. What started off as a massive conflict has been absolutely resolved. They are on an island. And it looks, I can imagine it's picturesque in many ways. It's just I can hear the music changing now, isn't it? The music that was there, that was of doom and gloom, when the storm was raging, has absolutely changed. They're crawling onto the shore wet, but every single one of the 276 of them have survived. And look at verse 2. The native people showed us unusual kindness. Unusual kindness. For they kindled a fire and welcomed us all, because it had begun to rain and was cold. Verse 3, then Paul gathered. When Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks and put them on the fire, a viper came out because of the heat and fastened onto his hand. You can't foretell how this story will go, can you? At what point will we hit and they lived, happily forever? Because it just seems like we've landed now. So let's use those circumstances to say, oh yeah, now I can see, this is going to go well. Snake. What happens after the snake comes? Listen to these people. They're interesting characters. Verse 4. Now, when the native people saw the creature hanging from his hand, they said to one another, no doubt this man was a murderer. Though he had escaped from the sea, justice has not allowed him to live. What are they using to interpret things? Remember those chaps before they set out from, forget where it was, to Phoenix, heading out to Phoenix? It's all about circumstances. Circumstances look favorable. We can do this. We can do this. Now on the island, circumstances look terrible. They make conclusions. This man must be a murderer. And then they sit looking at him. He's not dying. They change their minds. This man must be a god. Compare those chaps with Paul. Is that how Paul is functioning? Oh, it's dark. God doesn't exist. Oh, the sun is out. God is alive. Oh, he likes me. God is truly good. Oh, she hates me. I'm not really sure about God's mercies anymore. Faith in God. Not circumstances. Faith in God. Despite circumstances. This is the story. Take courage. Even when all cause for hope has been extinguished. Viper is hanging on the hand. You are about to die. This story will end exactly as God has said it will end. He survives it. God will just use the centurion liking him, he'll use an absolute miracle. So everything is in his hand. Because if you're like, well, I can see how you can navigate this story, but surely a venomous viper has bit you. These people know they're snakes. And the only thing that can change the circumstances is a miracle, then a miracle is what will happen. Even if you're a Baptist. Because God doesn't care what your little theology is saying. You won't fit him into that box. His purposes will be fulfilled at all costs. So they're in this island, unusual kindness. Skip down to verse 7. Those who received us and entertained us hospitably for 3 days. Verse 10. They honored us greatly. And when we were about to sail, they put on board whatever we needed. Just the opposite. Just God supplied them everything that they needed. They lost a whole bunch of stuff out at sea on this little island that God led them to. Unusual kindness. They're entertained. Provision. And off they go to Rome. And they arrive in Rome. This is really the story, guys. Verse 11. After 3 months, we set sail in a ship that had wintered in the island. A ship of Alexandria, with the twin gods as a figurehead. Putting in at Syracuse, we stayed there for 3 days. And from there, we made a circuit and arrived at Rhegium. And after 1 day, the south wind sprung up. And on the second day, we came to Puteoli. There we found brothers who invited us to stay with them for 7 days. And so we came to Rome. What is packed in that little phrase? And so we came to Rome. How did we come to Rome? All the way back in chapter 19. You remember? Way back chapter 19. That's how many chapters ago? That's a long time ago. What did we read? Paul resolved. Remember this? To go to Macedonia, Achaia, Jerusalem, and after that, to where? To Rome. But he doesn't know what will happen in Jerusalem. Then God appears in 23:11, stood beside him, and says to him, as you have testified to me, or the facts about me here in Jerusalem, so you must also testify in Rome. And so chapter 27, they head out to Rome. Oh my goodness, trials, people trying to kill them, snakes, storms. And then they came to Rome. It teaches us multiple things, doesn't it? One, we who are such small little human beings, we can resolve. We can make resolutions, imagine. That's how this story began. How did they get to Rome? You could say through Paul's resolve. It's not the full truth, but it's part of the truth. Paul was driven by a holy ambition to spread the fame of his Lord. And so he resolved that he was going to take that name to the uttermost parts of the world. And so they go to Rome. Paul encourages us to do that. Listen to him as he's speaking to the Thessalonians. To this end, we always pray for you that our God may make you worthy of his calling and may fulfill every resolve for good and every work of faith by his power. How does God want us to live? Not saying, well, I don't know. He wants us to live with resolve. I resolve, for the sake of his name, to do the following. How does Paul pray? That God might fulfill each and every one of those resolves. How? Through his power. Because my goodness, our resolves have nothing apart from his power. This is how the line reads, and so we came to Rome. How did they come to Rome? Well, via Jerusalem, aka embracing of suffering. Paul's path to Rome was not apart from Jerusalem. How did they come to Rome? Absolutely through God's providence. Through God's providence. That's how they got to Rome. The power of God on absolute display in the face of opposition to get them to Rome. How did they get to Rome? Through many dangers, toils, and snares. This is how they got to Rome. Since this is how we will make it safely home, isn't it? Let us not choose another path other than this particular path. To follow Jesus into Jerusalem, through the storm, onto Rome, onto our home. And when we are buffeted, do not be surprised, because if these choice servants of God, who had given their lives for the sake of his name, went through that, how much more us? You could make it greater than that. If our very own Lord, he did not make it to the point where he was given a crown before he embraced the cross. If that was our own Lord and that was his path, how much more us? But here's what we can be confident in. We are not alone. We have God and his promises to hold on to. So no matter what we face, we can always say to our own discouraged souls and to each other, take courage. Take courage. Have faith in God. Our story will end exactly as he has said it will end. So, Father, we pray that you would allow us to not lose a single one who's amongst us today. That none would fall short of the grace to which we have been called. But that you might allow those weak joints to be strengthened, those loose limbs to be lifted. That you might allow all of us to yet once again, despite the circumstances, to lift up our heads and to look to you, to wait on you, to hope in you, to have faith in you. We cannot do this apart from you. And so we pray that you take your word and that you would use it to fan, to flame faith in you, so that we would remain faithful until the very last day. Would you accomplish this again, we pray, for your glory in this church and the joy of the nations. We pray this through Christ. Amen.